Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Climate Policy and Scrutiny Subcommittee. I'm Councillor Alan Edwards, the Chair of the Subcommittee. We don't have anybody in the public gallery, but we are not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does go off, please make your way out by the nearest emergency exit and gather at the assembly point in front of Runnymede Hall. Please make sure mobile phones are off, and just to note, this meeting is being live streamed. If there's any technical difficulties with the stream, we will upload the meeting as soon as possible after it concludes. Members of the subcommittee, if we could start on the left, on my left, and introduce yourselves.
Councillor Peter May.
Councillor Tim Copsey.
Councillor Sharon Ainsley.
Councillor Barry Palmer, Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Climate.
Thank you all. The first item of the agenda is apologies for absence. We've received no apologies for absence. Are there any members' interests to declare? I'll take the silence as a no. Thank you. Members, item 3 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of October 2024 agreed as a correct record. Thank you very much. Item 4, the local nature recovery strategy and the supporting the authorities pre-publication consultation. So we have a report from the Assistant Director for Climate and Growth, which gives us an update to the committee on the local nature recovery scheme and the response to that consultation, which was issued by our portfolio holder for the environment. Ms. Parrott, if you could introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this is an item for noting only, and it provides feedback to you on work you've previously undertaken as a committee. The Local Nature Recovery Strategy, which I'll call the LNRS going forward, is a strategy setting out the priorities for nature recovery in Essex and the proposed actions to be taken to contribute towards those priorities. It has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Environment Act 2021 and covers Greater Essex. Just to be clear, it was the government who established the requirement for the LNRS to cover Greater Essex, and they identified Essex County Council as the responsible authority for that work. So it wasn't something that Essex County Council decided to do off their own back, it was an instruction from government. ECC have prepared the LNRS in accordance with regulations set out by the government in 2023, and that's the Environment Local Nature Recovery Strategy Procedure Regulations. To this end, they consulted with us back in 2024 on the draft strategy. We responded in October 2024, and that response was considered by this committee in September and then approved by the Cabinet in October before being sent. As part of that consultation, we raised issues relating to the mapping in the document and sought further consideration of strategic opportunities for biodiversity enhancement in Dawes Heath and in Fundersley. We raised concerns about the likelihood of securing marine habitat enhancements around the import wharves on Canvey, and we sought for additional information to be included in the document on how it is envisaged that some of the opportunities would be secured and monitored. Prior to Essex County Council being able to move to approval of the final LNRS, ECC are required to consult for a period of 28 days with supporting authorities. Supporting authorities constitute all of the local planning authorities across Essex, so the 15 local planning authorities. As part of that consultation, supporting authorities had 28 days only, as specified in the regulations, consider whether they wish to object to the publication of the final LNRS on just 2 points. That being, can it be justified on the basis of the results of consultation, and is it materially deficient in some way? We were provided with copies of the proposed final documents, links to the mapping, and a changelog which detailed where matters raised during the consultation had been addressed through the plan. The changelog evidences how matters raised through consultation were taken into account in the preparation of the final local nature recovery strategy. We reviewed all of this documentation and mapping. The mapping has been substantially improved, especially in relation to strategic opportunities. There is now a significant coverage around Dawes Heath and through the gap between Benfleet and Fundersley that had not been previously identified. This is because the size of the hexagons used in this mapping have been reduced from covering 25 kilometres squared to just 1 hectare. So that's about 100 metres by 100 metres. And this provides much greater granularity in what is achievable in that location by sort of narrowing down on those points. The marine opportunity map does remain unchanged. However, the document now recognising that shipping may impact on the delivery of that, but it is actually the only area in Essex identified in the Thames estuary. And greater detail on delivery is incorporated within the document overall, although Essex County Council as an organisation aren't responsible for the delivery of all of the actions and cannot dictate to the rest of us what we should or should not do. So there's obviously an extent to which they could set that out. Given these changes, there were no grounds to object to the publication of the LNRS as it was not materially deficient and the consultation responses had been taken into account. Due to the short timescales for response, which was just 28 days, it didn't align with the Council's governance arrangements, and a portfolio holder decision was issued by the leader as a representative of the Cabinet, indicating that we did not have any objections to the publication of the LNRS. Since writing the report that you have before you, I can confirm that the same was true across Essex, and the LNRS will now progress to a meeting of Essex County Council for approval on the 26th of June before being sent to the Secretary of State for approval in July. As there were no objections from any of the supporting authorities, it expected that the approval will be received from the Secretary of State during the summer. I'm happy to take any questions through the chair.
Members, do we have any questions?
Will you take comments as well, or was there?
Go ahead, Councillor Coatsey.
Well, I just wanted to say that I welcome this piece of work overall, local nature recovery strategy. Also, it's encouraging that we had a chance to look at it, make observations, make corrections, submit that, and they've been taken on board. So it sort of vindicates that it's good to scrutinise these things and you know, find out what works for our community. And I'm particularly pleased to see certain areas identified for further opportunities to recover nature within our areas, because our green spaces are very precious to us and to our residents. So this to me is a good piece of work as a foundation for moving forward. But as I say, I'm particularly pleased that we had a chance to scrutinise it, make comments, and they were taken up, and it's made a better final outcome in terms of Castle Point. So just wanted to say I was pleased about that, and thank you for the officers for their work on it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Coatsey. Councillor Ainsley.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Yeah, I do welcome the work that's been done on this. I don't think it goes far enough. I'm a little bit concerned about the lack of focus on South Benfleet, in particular because the greenbelt extends all the way up to and past Thurrock, heading west. And it's very difficult to see what's actually intended on this map. It looks like it's grassland or something like that, which is already there. Woodland and grassland. I would have liked to have seen, as was originally proposed, I think back in about 2010, a forest extending from all along the Thames estuary and the Thames corridor, but we don't seem to be entertaining that at all in this report. In South Benfleet, there is very little open space, and there's certainly no woodlands. So it's a bit disappointing from that point of view.
Ms. Parrott, if you can shed some light on that.
Yep. So the strategic opportunities mapping is based on what is there and the opportunities that have the potential to come from what is there. And the strategic opportunities map then takes the top 15% for each habitat and maps that across Essex. So what is interesting from a Castle Point perspective is that where you aren't already covered with a nature designation, across most of the remaining open land, there is an opportunity within the top 15% for it to be some kind of nature conservation opportunity at a strategic level in the top 15% across the country. With regards to South Benfleet, because of the nature of the topography and what's there already, the science lends itself to saying that actually you're better off in some of these areas looking at either standing freshwater habitats or grassland habitats, because you're more likely to achieve that. Whereas where you're up in Dawes Heath and Fundersley in particular, because you've got the woodlands there already, the opportunities are greater around woodlands. But that's not to say if you plant trees in South Benfleet they won't grow. It's just that the opportunity is greater in terms of nature recovery around grassland.
If I can come back for a minute, Chair. Bearing in mind the rising sea levels, any initiative which would possibly soak up additional water, like a woodland, would be beneficial, don't you think, rather than wetland areas, which is obviously going to increase the potential for flooding?
I think we might be posing questions here which are interesting to get through, are probably beyond the scope of what we've got on the agenda.
I would just say that obviously in low-lying areas, sometimes you do want to create wetland areas basically to let the water in, because it gives somewhere for that water to go when you have extreme rainfall events. So it might seem a little counterintuitive, but actually, yeah, sometimes you do want to create wetlands for that reason, particularly in low-lying areas. And you see it on Canvey as well. At Waterside, you've got that big field and the reeds and everything, and that works quite well in terms of managing that flood water, even though it's a low-lying area.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Go ahead, Councillor May.
Yeah, thank you for the work you've done. You can see there's a lot of work being put down on this, so I fully support it, so well done. And this is just a general question. A while back, we had a policy where we went out and planted trees in residential areas, and that was a win-win, because we worked with the police, because we planted trees in antisocial behaviour areas, and planting the trees softened the areas up, made them look more pretty, which then reduced rubbish being dumped. And the police even said it reduced antisocial behaviour. So could we look at getting that programme back on and planting trees in residential areas?
So I suspect that overlaps with item 6 on your agenda. So I think we can get to that point later this evening.
Good point. Thank you. Well, I'd just like to echo the thanks from the committee for all of the work that's gone in on this. I think going forward, we need to keep an eye on one critical thing, which is our urban density and how much difference having the right mapping makes, because we'd not have got the links in this document between the Downs and Dawes Heath and Thundersley unless we'd got that change. So that's a note to self and a note to all of us, I think. So members, is the report noted? So moving on to agenda item 5, the Castle Point Biodiversity Report. We have another report from our Assistant Director for Climate and Growth, which seeks our views on the Biodiversity Report and makes recommendations to Cabinet for proposed next steps. Ms. Parrott, if you can give us the report, please.
So when this committee met last year, it was agreed that we would proceed with the preparation of a biodiversity report. This was agreed by Cabinet when it was subsequently reported up to them. The preparation of a biodiversity report is a requirement of Section 40 of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act, as a consequence of the amendments arising from the Environment Act in 2021. Section 40 of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act places a general duty on local authorities to preserve and enhance biodiversity, and from time to time to consider what actions it can properly take within its powers to further that duty. Following on from this committee and the approval from Cabinet, the Council appointed specialists in ecology and biodiversity to prepare a biodiversity report for the Council to reflect this duty, and this is provided as Appendix 1 to the report that you have before you. The report recommends 5 areas of action. These are clear governance. We need to be clearer as to whose portfolio, both at a political level and at an officer level, the biodiversity duty sits within. Development management policies. As the Castle Point Plan is developed, we need to build in robust policies for the protection and enhancement of biodiversity. Land management. We need to ensure that where we own land, we are managing it with biodiversity in mind, especially where we own local wildlife sites, such as some of the woodlands. There needs to be process review. So are our policies biodiversity friendly? Do we have procedures in place? For example, if we find bats in the roof of a council house, what happens when we're licensing an event in an open space? Do we consider the biodiversity impacts of that? So it's those kinds of things that actually cross more broadly across the council. There's also a recommendation around education. So are we doing enough to promote an understanding and appreciation of biodiversity to our residents and businesses? So when residents are astroturfing their gardens, are we making them aware of the impact that that has, not just on water and so forth, but actually on biodiversity? Are we having the right conversations with developers around their role in terms of biodiversity and the impacts that they have when they're building things? So the report that you have before you this evening recommends that you consider the biodiversity report and the list of recommended actions and make recommendations to Cabinet with regard to the approval of the biodiversity report and with regard to the actions it recommends taking to protect and enhance biodiversity. Through your deliberations, please bear in mind that the actions are cross-cutting and will require different parts of the Council's operations to incorporate biodiversity into their report, into their work, and that the main costs associated with the biodiversity report are associated with the lands management element. There is some assigned resource to plan for improved biodiversity on our own land. However, delivery of any plans will require contract amendments with Pinnacle, which may occur an initial cost. It is anticipated that such costs will be relatively modest and managed through contracts as they're renewed, and we may be able to recoup such costs if we register parcels of our own land as biodiversity net gain sites, because we will be able to use developers to pay for the management of those biodiversity units over time through that National Biodiversity Net Gain Scheme. I hope that summarises the report sufficiently, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Amanda. I think talking about Councillor May's comment about improving the street scene, it's certainly one way of improving biodiversity on council property and in our high streets and things like that, with planting trees and flower planters and things such like. The tiniest little window box can actually support a huge amount of wildlife. Another thing that I'm really concerned about is Essex County Council. Whenever we have a builder or a developer in the area, they seem to think that it's perfectly okay to chop down the trees, the Essex County Council trees, or lop off a few branches, or tear up the turf, and if you report it to Essex County Council, they respond about 6 months later, by which time it's too late, and then they say something about vegetation and it would recover. That's not good enough. It's really not good enough. People move to these areas because of the street scene, because it's pleasing environment, and it provides a habitat for wildlife. So I'd like to see that protected in this as well. Thank you.
Barrett, have you got any response that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to liaise with Stuart around any recommendations with regards to additional street trees, although that's also a highway issue as well, isn't it? So I'd have to liaise with Stuart and indeed highways. With regards to reports into highways, I mean, obviously I can't comment on their response at this point in time. And it's obviously a situation that would potentially persist for the next 3 years as things currently stand. So,
Thank you. Councillor Copesy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. The first one, probably a quickish one. It was identified that we need to sort of allocate who is sort of keeping an eye on this from a governance point of view. Is that was one of that's how I took it, and also from a member point of view. So has that been sort of resolved, sort of where this might impact across all departments, but where does it sort of sit, so to speak?
So at the moment, we kind of generally assume that it sits with Mike Fuller as the portfolio holder for the environment, but that it isn't actually specified within his portfolio that he's responsible for the biodiversity duty. And as the planning policy lead, I've generally picked it up because I was picking other stuff up. And they, the county council engaged with the planners through the for the local nature recovery strategy work, so it kind of got picked up as part of that. But actually, if you read my portfolio, it doesn't sit within that either, or indeed Stuart's. So it's not specifically covered under anyone's portfolio, so it's just a case that it has been picked up at this point in time.
I think I get you, but does it, sort of as it were, moving forward from this point, do you think that will be clarified? So it is absolutely not just.
So I think it's a job of the council. It's one of the recommended actions that it is clarified, but it's not a decision for me to take.
No, it's fair enough.
It's a decision for the cabinet to take that needs to be resolved.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask my second one?
Yeah. I'm just going to follow up on that. So, are we satisfied that the report in front of us is clear enough that needs to be clarified by cabinet in that case? Because you had a question on it.
Well, to me, it was raising that there's an issue there, a little bit of untidiness, and I, as we're sort of cleaning up everything and surely that's one of the things that needs to be flagged and just resolved. Shouldn't have thought it would be a major trauma, but
Well, I don't think it is. All I'm saying is it clear enough in the report, or do we just need to tweak the wording to make it clear that where the decision sits? Sharon, are you coming back on this?
Yes, exactly. We do need to tweak the report to make sure that that is addressed, because otherwise, excuse me, otherwise that is kind of a bit of a black area which could be manipulated if we're not careful. If nobody's actually physically looking. So I think, yes, we need to tweak the report to make sure that Cabinet understand what we're saying. Thank you.
Okay, I think perhaps we'll just make that a margin note for the moment. If we've got any other changes we do, maybe we'll adjourn briefly and decide on a change and come back with a recommendation. You had another question.
Thank you, Chair. The other one was in that nice little box of summary of recommended actions 1 to funnily enough, action 1 is about clarity, but it still doesn't leave me knowing precisely what's what. But putting that to one side, the other one that jumps out at me is action 3, which I fully support and 100% endorse. However, I want to know if it can go broader, because it says review the management of council land, especially local wildlife sites, to maintain and enhance biodiversity, which I 100% back and endorse and think should be a high priority. But I'm aware that there is other land in Castle Point which is also local wildlife site, and obviously we wouldn't have direct control over that land because we're the council and it's in the private. But I would like it if we were encouraging progress on that front with other, if there's a mechanism for it to be picked up, that it's not just, because with a lot of this stuff that we're looking at tonight, it's much broader than just our own organisation and what comes directly. We want to see a borough-wide greening, for want of a better word, and if there's any scope to, say, encourage other landowners of local wildlife site to explore the possibilities, then I think that would be a positive enhancement.
Is that something that's within our power?
So you can certainly encourage, but beyond that, probably not anything else, because it's what's within your actions you can properly take in fulfilling your legal duties, and obviously your legal duties extend to your land and to the other things that you can do, but they don't extend to obviously making other people do stuff on their land. So it's an encourage situation.
I keep forgetting, sorry. Of course, quite some time ago, we were informed that any new builds of properties would be as close to environmental friendly as we could get them, and also there was I think it was Mark Evershed at the time, said about every new build there would be a minimum of 6 trees planted. Is that still in progress?
So you can set those policies through the Castle Point plan, and there is a separate board which is working on the Castle Point plan. So anything to do with planning and development will be picked up via that means.
The other thing I was just going to say is some time ago, I actually got stopped in the street and someone showed me, like, we talk about solar panels on new builds, but these were actually tiles. But they were solar panel tiles and that. And I just thought if we sort of put something in the policy about looking at that sort of thing.
I think we've got something about that in the next item, actually. Yeah. So, thank you. if I can just ask a couple of questions myself. We mentioned assessing policy across the council. Is there an established framework that we'll be using for that, or will we be doing it? Because I'd like to see us we're sort of benchmarking ourselves against something.
Not that I'm aware of, but we can look into seeing if we can come up with a framework. There might be something that someone else is using that we could copy.
I think otherwise we're kind of marking our own homework on it. So, okay, and I can't resist asking, are there any planning constraints on AstroTurf, as you specifically mentioned it?
Sadly, no. So as in theory, it drains because there are holes in it. So it isn't an impermeable surface. And as long as you would treat it with edging and stuff, then it would not be an impermeable surface. So you could actually use it. And in fact, in the rear garden, you can do whatever you want anyway, which we had a whole session about a couple of years back, which is quite disappointing. So at this point in time, no. There was mention of it by Michael Gove when he was Secretary of State, trying to resolve that problem, but obviously the governance situation has changed and that hasn't come back to the fore at this point in time.
Thank you for that. So are there any other questions? Do we want to pause briefly, adjourn briefly to make some quick amendment suggestions? Yep. Okay. Okay, thank you for your time. I think that was a productive discussion on the detail. So we've got three changes that we are requesting to the report. I'm going to read all three, and I'm proposing these as a change to the report, and I will then ask for a seconder and ask for your agreement to the changes. So on action 1, we are asking for a change to say assign accountability for the biodiversity duty to a cabinet member and a lead officer. On action 3, the change is to review the management of council land, especially LOWS, to maintain and enhance biodiversity and encourage other landowners with local wildlife sites to maintain and enhance biodiversity also. And on action 4, establish a suitable framework for incorporating the consideration of biodiversity into all internal decision-making processes and practices. Is anybody happy to second those changes? Councillor Ainsley, thank you. And are we all happy with those changes? Okay, that's all agreed. Thank you.
You need to then vote on the actual recommendation.
That would be good to do. Okay, so with those amendments agreed, are we happy to are we happy to move the recommendation set out in paragraph 3.1 of the report?
Sorry, Chair. Could I make an amendment to action 5 by just adding the word actively to actively promote the understanding and appreciation of biodiversity to residents and businesses?
You can. We will need to vote again on that. So action 5, we will add the word actively, so to actively promote the understanding and appreciation of biodiversity to residents and businesses. So you're proposing that. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor May. And we need to vote on that. All agreed? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Members, back to the substantive motion. I move the recommendations set out in paragraph 3.1 of the report, that with those amendments made, we recommend the report to Cabinet. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ainsley, thank you. And is that agreed? Agreed, thank you. Moving on to item 6, the Climate Action Plan 2025. We have a report from our Assistant Director for Climate and Growth, which seeks the views of the committee on the approach proposed to secure climate action in Castle Point and a proposed action plan for delivering climate action within our organisation at the council and across the borough. Ms Parrott, if you could introduce the third report.
So you'll be pleased to hear this is my final report for the evening, although probably the most complex one. So this report deals with how we take forward climate action in Castle Point, and this responds specifically to the council's ambition to have a greener and cleaner environment and the specific target of our corporate plan of reducing the council's carbon footprint. This is important because climate change is a global problem that has significant local consequences because we are a low-lying area susceptible to flood risk. We also have, on average, an older population who are at greater risk of extreme hot and extreme cold weather. The future well-being of our residents and our communities is therefore really affected by climate change. However, responding to climate change can bring positive benefits. It potentially reduces our energy bill as an organisation and makes us and our communities less vulnerable to fluctuations in the prices of oil and gas. It improves our local air quality and brings about other benefits in terms of health and well-being and economic opportunities. It's therefore important that we look at climate action both holistically and prioritise it at a local level so that those actions that work best for Castle Point and our customers and our communities are taken forward. However, Castle Point is not so dissimilar to other places in the UK that we can't use an existing framework to shape our programme of activity. Back in 2021, a group of 30 commissioners from across various sectors prepared a report setting out a framework for achieving net zero in Essex. This is provided at Appendix 1 of your report. It makes recommendations for achieving net zero in Essex by 2050, looking across 6 themes, these being land use and green infrastructure, energy, the built environment, transport, waste and community engagement. These recommendations cut across the sectors and across organisations. Therefore, some of the recommendations apply to Castle Point and the organisation of Castle Point Borough Council, and some others apply to other organisations. For example, at this point in time, Essex County Council are responsible for highways and transport, so most of the transport recommendations apply to them and not necessarily to us as an organisation. What the report does is highlight that there is a need for considerable effort across the different organisations in Essex by 2030 to have any chance of achieving net zero by 2050. 2030 is now only 5 years away. Utilising the themes and recommendations arising from the Essex Climate Action Commission report, a climate action plan for Castle Point has been drafted. This looks at what could be done between now and 2028 to begin moving Castle Point in the direction of net zero. The actions cut across the organisation and by necessity draw in colleagues involved in estates and housing, in the environment, in waste and in procurement and finance. Beyond the organisation, there is scope for officers in other areas to work with the communities and businesses to drive up awareness and community-led action around climate change, and for policies to be put in place to require new developments to be more sustainable. The draft action plan is at Appendix 2 and currently comprises a rather extensive list of what could be done to deliver climate action in Castle Point. The views of the committee on the action plan, the items that should be prioritised and whether anything should be added to, removed from or amended on the action plan is sought at this time so that it can be refined and enhanced before being brought back for review and recommendation to Cabinet. A key issue with delivering a climate action plan for Castle Point is monitoring. At this time, we do not have a system in place for robustly monitoring and reporting on our carbon emissions as an organisation. Whilst we can capture our Scope 1 emissions, so that's our gas and petrol diesel use from our energy bills and our fuel receipts, and our Scope 2 emissions from our electric bills, we cannot capture our Scope 3 emissions associated with our suppliers, our employees and our customers. It's therefore critical that as we progress a climate action plan, we put in place the monitoring systems and arrangements to ensure that if we are taking action, we're doing so effectively and we can actually see what we're achieving. At this time, the report asked the committee to endorse the guidance set out in the Essex Climate Action Commission report, take steps to move Castle Point towards net zero by 2050 in the period to 2028, support our partners in taking the actions they are responsible for, and consider procuring a carbon accounting software so that we can monitor and manage the approach to net zero. It also asks that you review and provide views on the climate action plan provided at Appendix 2 so officers can finalise it and bring it back to you at a later date before progressing to Cabinet. I hope that this summarises the report sufficiently. Appreciating it is quite chunky, particularly Appendix 2. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Amanda, I have been for a long time very concerned about air quality in the borough, and specifically that we have no air quality monitoring, other than I believe at Hoffs at the old fire station. But is that actually working? I don't believe it was working. We did have some on the A130 at Canby Way, but they were removed when there was an objection raised by the Environment Agency to the creation of the shopping centre there, because the air quality was so poor, and and all of a sudden the air monitors were gone. And I personally put up air monitoring as well, and it came back 1.5 times over the legal limit. So I would like to see incorporated within this that we put up more air quality monitoring stations, and those readings are fed into a database, and make sure we're specifically looking for nitrogen oxide, is it? Forget what it's called now, sorry.
NOx.
Yeah, NOx, thank you very much. Looking for that, because a lot of these monitoring systems don't look for some of the more harmful chemicals that are produced in air pollution. And obviously what we have is a situation where air pollution is not static, it moves. So we gather all the air, if the wind's in the right or the wrong direction, whichever way you want to say it, that air pollution comes from London. It comes down the Thames from London onto Benfleet and Canvey Island. It also comes across the Channel. So we really do need to get a handle on this and make sure we're protecting our residents. It's important. And one other point I wanted to make is
Councillor Ainsley, can I just suggest that we get a response to that, and
Yeah,
then
sorry.
that we just consider amongst us we'll consider the Essex report and then go through Appendix 2, so we impose a bit of structure on it, because I think otherwise we're going to come back to the same points if we're not careful.
So in terms of air quality monitoring, we have an automated monitor on HOFs, but actually across the whole borough we have diffusion tubes that are put up and taken down on a monthly basis, and consequently we have monitoring information for NOx going back probably about 15 years. This is reported on a website called Essex Air, and we receive annual reports. They are received by our environmental health team, and so the extent of my knowledge is from my degree and from the fact that I've read those reports, but I'm not an air quality expert myself. But they do actually show that there are particular points in the borough, particularly where congestion is higher, where NOx levels are higher, and that's consistently so over time. But the move to electric vehicles has resulted, and you can see it looking at that sort of that longitudinal data, has seen a reduction over time in NOx levels across the borough. They're cited in locations where there is the potential for exposure. So exposure is measured by the fact that someone can be on a footpath and being exposed to those fumes. That's the rules around how these tubes are located. So around Sadler's Farm, the one that's most relevant to us, for example, is near the houses that are on the north side of just coming off the Sadler's Farm. That's the nearest one to Sadler's Farm. We wouldn't necessarily put one over by the boot sale, firstly because it's in Basildon, but secondly because actually there is no pedestrians there, so you only put them where there are pedestrians and the risk of exposure.
Sorry, just come back, but there are none along the A130.
There
Canvey
won't be
Way.
any. There won't be any on Canvey Way because there are no pedestrians,
But
because there is no footway.
There are residents.
So
This is what I'm trying to make the point, that there is the residential area, the lining the A130, and that is where I put up my air quality monitoring tube, and that's where it was most toxic.
yes, it would be, but if there's no pedestrians walking on the A130, because the nature of diffusion into the atmosphere, they measure it at the roadside. They don't measure it somewhere away because, in theory, the levels should be more diffused at that point. But obviously, it's also affected by things such as people having log burners and so forth.
Yeah, with respect, it doesn't just affect pedestrians; it affects people in their own homes. So this is the point that I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Useful information there. Okay. Are there any questions on the Essex County Council section of the report. Councillor Ainsley.
Yes, sorry. I'm just wondering if we are doing enough. The latest data from the European Climate Data Agency, Copernicus, confirmed that for the first time, the Earth has reached a critical warming level of above 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level for the first time in a year. That was the statistics April 2025. So is that report out of date?
Before you answer that, I can also chip in with a related question. I've noted in the actual report itself that there are targets for 2023 and targets for 2025. So my gut feeling is that we should probably note the good work that's in there rather than endorse it, because clearly there's work gone on that's not incorporated in that report. I think when we discussed this prior to the meeting, there was some there are updates published on the Essex County Council website, etc., that aren't incorporated in the body of the report. So if we can have some feedback on that.
So this is a report that was prepared at a point in time, and it was almost 5 years ago now. And a lot of authorities have endorsed it and have started moving towards it. In that period of time, we have not, and we haven't done anything alternatively, particularly either. We did have an action plan, but it was a bit sporadic and not necessarily related to actually any particular target or any particular outcomes. So it is a point in time. The situation possibly has got worse if the science is indicating that, but the government's target still remains 2050, and elements of this go faster than what the government are intending at this point in time. In terms of what has been delivered and what hasn't been delivered, there are elements of it that haven't met the targets or the deadlines within that. And that's particularly true, for example, around planning policy. I think they were probably anticipating by this point in time that everyone would have reviewed their plans and have got policies embedded, as you're aware, our situation. But Basildon are similarly in the same place. Uttlesford are only just taking a plan to examination. I think Chelmsford's draft plan has now got it in, that's going to examination. But say the North Essex authorities, the timings of where their plans were prepared and then this was published and their reviews, they're actually a little way off getting these policies into their plans as well. So I think there was elements of the Commission report that are a little bit ambitious around some areas, but other areas have managed to make progress. So I think there's probably a degree of pinch of salt you could take around some of the timescales, but I think what they were trying to indicate was that there are things that you can do relatively quickly and simply in theory, like planning policy, which would be good if things didn't keep changing, that you can do, and things that will take longer. So if you think about aviation, the switch to sort of sustainable fuels in aviation is going to take a much longer period of time, regardless of whether you try to do it really quickly. It's just technologically really hard. Whereas in theory, planning policy should be something that's relatively quick to do. So I think it's just based on that kind of approach.
Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, Chair. I've probably got, as we discuss this further, some more things will come up that I'd like to raise, but it's sort of a planning related thing, which kind of follows on from what Amanda's just said. One of the things that in this the Essex report jumped out at me was the requirement that every new house would be net zero compliant, so solar panels and environmentally friendly construction, etc., etc. And it's, I think it was noted in our report on this report that because that relates to local plans and various people's local plans are not, in count all around the place are not in place yet. But it suddenly occurred to me, for example, take another planning policy, seal. Now, I think that I had heard people saying, well, you can't have seal unless you've got a new up-to-date local plan in place. But we've got a seal policy without an up-to-date new local plan in place. So is there anything technically to stop us introducing a council policy that says all new builds will be environmentally friendly, net zero compliant? So it's sort of a technical question, because obviously that can be incorporated into a council plan, but that, some things take longer to come to fruition. So it's that is a question rather than a comment.
So community infrastructure levy was introduced under the community infrastructure levy regulations, which is separate to the plan making regulations, and we somehow got a seal through based on our old plan because the urban areas were washed to salmon pink, and there was a policy associated with that in the 1998 plan. We do not have a policy in the 1998 plan to hook every house will be sustainable and net zero to. We have nothing vaguely like that because nothing was really thought about in that regard in 1996 when it was drafted, or the early 90s when it was drafted, and then 1996 when it was examined, and 1998 when it was adopted. So we have nothing in the old plan to hook it to. So therefore we cannot do a supplementary planning document to sort of do anything like that. We need to have a local plan that has a policy that says we will do net zero, or we'll, whatever it is that you wish to achieve, to have that local policy to be able to apply that to new builds. And even Colchester, whose plan was only adopted a couple of years back, because their plan was submitted 2017, it took forever for their plan to be examined. So 2017, it didn't have this newer stuff in it, and so they're in an equally stuck position, even though their plan's actually relatively recently adopted. So,
okay, thanks for clarity on that.
Are there any more questions on the Essex part of the report?
Yeah, a couple of other things in that Essex report. There's a big section on transport, which is good because transport has a massive effect on these matters. But I'm not sure that it's addressing all the issues around that. So what I mean by this is, if you're in a situation where you've, like London, for example, where you've got great underground networks and buses every 3 minutes or whatever, it's fine. You could sort of have policies that discourage all cars and people just use the walk. And if you're in a place like Castle Point or a lot of Essex or rural Essex, you're going to get cars, basically, whatever you try and do to discourage people having cars to get from A to B, even if it's driving to the station and getting a train or so forth. What seems to me to fly in the face of this, especially in Castle Point, is if you keep overdeveloping Castle Point, you are naturally going to increase the traffic problems, people sitting in a traffic jam, which is not good for the environment in terms of fumes and all the rest of it, that when you're idling in a car, etc. And I feel like it's some of its stuff is a bit idealistic. It tending towards that we can just encourage everybody to walk 40 minutes to the station or whatever. It's not sort of tackling that you have, each area has a spatial capacity, and if you ignore that, you will increase the transport and congestion and all those issues around that. So I've got concerns that it does flag some good things, but it's sort of ignoring some other glaring issues. So that's my point on the transport.
I can't disagree with you, but I think we covered the fact that the Essex section of this report isn't applicable to all areas, but I share your concerns on that. Councillor Ainsley.
And I believe that, thank you, Joe, one glaring omission is is water security. We don't have enough water, and keep building more development here. Where is the fresh water going to come from? There's nothing in here about water security that I've seen, unless I've missed it. There's a lot about flooding. Thank you.
So there is actually a separate Essex water strategy which has basically done a thorough review of all the data around water supply, water quality, sort of water demand going forward and so forth. So we can maybe bring that as a separate report at a later date. This one focuses more on the carbon side of things, but recognising that actually, water is also an issue in Essex, an issue in South Essex, and going to be worsened by climate change.
Good point, thank you. Are there any more questions, Councillor Copsey?
Well, just on focusing on this Essex document, there's a nice chunk in here which I like. It's about land use and so forth, and it's talking about farmland, and it's talking about increasing green spaces, and it's saying green space is good for your mental health, and all these benefits good for the carbon absorbing, etc., etc., etc. And there's a lot about saying how we're going to expand green infrastructure and green, which I absolutely love. But again, I don't see how this seems to fly in the face of how can you expand green spaces if at the same time you're concreting over it with thousands upon thousands of houses. There's a disconnect with reality, which I find unsettling. But I like their objectives of saying we want to, and the quality of the green spaces you've got, make it better. Maybe it's different grasslands, different creatures, etc., etc. But that worries me, that on the one hand saying, we're going to increase the amount of green spaces, and then on the other hand, ignoring, the rise of the concrete. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think we've got some questions on whether we're going to adopt this report in the whole. Councillor May.
Just a general question. So water was brought up. Could we not get a policy put in place where we get some reservoirs done in Castle Point? Because we're allowing mass building, and to be quite honest with you, I don't know of a reservoir in Castle Point. I know Anningfield, but I was just wondering if that's something that should be looked into.
I think we might be challenged on space, but if you've got any comment on that.
So there are plans that are done by the water companies in conjunction with DEFRA and Ofwat that look at water supply situations. That doesn't fall to the local planning authorities. It does sit at that sort of water supply company, DEFRA, Ofwat level rather than at the local level. And that's because actually in Castle Point, a lot of our water is coming in from all over the country. There's whole networks of systems that link up the east of England with the Midlands, and the Midlands is linked across to the west of England as well. So there's a massive, it's planned at a national level really, and then at a regional level, just because of the nature of the flows of water, to make sure that everyone's got water supply. So
it's one of the things I was going to say, is again, like it's, takes up lots of land, but we've got hundreds of acres of land that have got solar panels on them, where them solar panels, not in Castle Point, I'm talking about general, sorry, where them solar panels could be put on roofs, and all that land would be opened up for nature and reservoirs and things like that.
Councillor Ainsley.
Actually, you can put solar panels on a reservoir. They've just done that at the Queen Elizabeth II reservoir they've just built across in Kent, I think it is. So you can have both, cake and eat it.
Well, gaining twice is always good. Councillor Copsey.
This is a question specifically on this Essex document. So where there's recommendations for certain actions, what is that like a recommendation? Is it like binding and so forth? So I'll give you an example. Because obviously there's a question of does it go far enough and fast enough and deep enough because it was done in 20. But in other ways, some of the things seem quite like, for example, it's like no landfill in 5 years, which to me seems quite hard to target, to go from a percentage of to zero. And I don't know if that's like a recommendation or an aspiration, or is it like everybody that's signed up to this so far is taking that as binding? So that was my question.
My understanding is it's not binding on us, and it's up to us at this committee to make the recommendations from a political perspective that we'll adopt. Hence the Appendix 2, which is our plan. So if you've got anything to add to that.
No, I mean, they are set out as recommendations. They're not binding. I do believe, having had a conversation with Terry, that Essex, who are the waste authority in terms of where things go once we collect it, have actually managed to divert most of their waste from landfill now. So it may be that they have actually all got close to achieving that, but I'd have to confirm that, get Terry to confirm that for you.
That'd certainly be an interesting point to note. So, Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. So it says in 2035, waste heat reused. Presumably we're talking about anaerobic digesters, which are very nasty things. I have unfortunate experience of working next door to one. But I thought that, isn't there a new Essex waste management plan? Aren't we sending an awful lot of our waste to Sweden to be whatever they're doing with it out there? I think they're and I heard on the news tonight that Scotland are now going to send all their waste to England.
I can't comment on both of those, but heat recovery from places like data centres for regional heating and stuff could also factor in that. I don't think it would just be, for other industrial processes. But
I would have to get Terry to report to you on those kinds of matters, because I have no idea.
I think the feeling that I'm picking up from the committee is that there's good material in here, but we may have reservations about adopting the whole document, and perhaps we'll want to come up with a form of words for noting rather than adopting that. If we can move on, I'm just conscious of time, if we can move on to Appendix 2, and perhaps the way to do it will just be literally... Okay, we've got endorses the guidance, so it has been softened already. So if we're happy with that, I think we can probably move on to Appendix 2 is no, it follows the Essex thing in the documents. It's the tables. It was in the agenda pack that was online, because I printed this today.
Yeah, I printed mine out.
That would be tricky.
That's how I printed it.
I have to say, if you've not had an opportunity to read it, as this is our substantive plan, I think we're not really going to be able to proceed with this. because this is the part of the document that is going to be the basis for what we do between now and 2028. So I think we do probably need to pause and consider rather than do a half-hearted job of quickly reading it now. I'm just going to consult on what the procedure would be if we want to pause and then reconvene this meeting once we've had a time to consider it properly. Okay, so my proposal is that we defer this to the next meeting. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. And are we all in agreement for deferring that to the next meeting? Agreed? Okay. Thank you very much. The question I've got up here is: do we want to handle the first part separately?
Cabinet it and then
That we recommend it to cabinet, but
those ones which aren't part of the appendix.
the question is: do we deal with recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4? And I think. My recommendation looking at this is that we would now probably just consider recommendation 4, which will allow us to proceed with procuring software so that we can measure what we decide. We could take point 1 as well, but I think it's intimately connected with the report. It's in the agenda, in the beginning of the Climate Action Plan, item 6, page 1. Section 3, the recommendations. Reading this again, I think we can take the recommendations, in my view, all save for the further resolution, because that's effectively what we're going to do between now and the next meeting. That carries on page 2. Yeah. So, as I'm getting nods around the room, which are not necessarily visible outside, I propose then that we adopt and recommend to Cabinet that we endorse the guidance, endorses guidance, the Essex Climate Action Commission report entitled Net Zero, Making Essex Carbon Neutral, which aims to make Essex net zero by 2050. That we recommend to Cabinet that the Council take steps in line with the Essex Climate Action Commission report to move Castle Point Council and Castle Point towards net zero by 2050 in the period to 2028. That the Council supports Essex County Council and the other partners delivering those actions for which they're responsible for, as outlined in the Climate Action Commission report, and to move Castle Point towards net zero by 2050 in the period to 2028, and that the Council considers procuring a carbon accounting software to monitor and manage the Council's approach to net zero. If I could have a seconder for that. Councillor Ainsley, thank you. Super seconder of the day. And is that agreed, committee? Thank you. With our agreement then to hold off the detailed review of Appendix 2 until a future meeting, and I will discuss as to whether we try and squeeze another meeting in to progress that more rapidly. I think we are at the end of the meeting. So I'll call this meeting closed at 2019. Thank you.